Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for watching. We hear a lot about election integrity issues these days, and to be sure, a lot needs to be done despite elected officials in Tennessee insisting we're number one. But concerns about election integrity are nothing new, and one of the most blatant cases of an attempt to not only violate the integrity of an election, but to deny veterans the right to vote happened in Tennessee. The year was 1946, and what became an actual battle took place in Athens, Tennessee. The Battle of Athens is our topic tonight, and Dave Rentschler, who has researched this event and the key players, joins us tonight to tell us the facts of this historic event. But first, it's time for the Informer Report. Trump tariffs in the Supreme Court. Well, so far, the court does not seem to be they do not appear to be on Trump's side so far on the issue of tariffs. And really, I can't believe that somebody in his administration didn't point out to him that tariffs are the responsibility of Congress, not the president. And even the law that he is using, the emergency law that he's using, according to what I have read and heard, it's never been used this way before. So we'll see how that turns out. And he's already pointed out that, hey, if the court rules against him, this is going to cost us trillions. And it's really going to throw a wrench in his plan. So we'll just have to see. Like I say, they don't seem to be too inclined to go along with it. This could really be huge, and it could be huge in a bad way. But hey, we do have a Constitution. You have to follow it. And, you should probably read it before you make big plans to do something like this. Well, Mamdani won in New York, as everybody knows. I just got to ask, how stupid are New Yorkers? I know it's a left-leaning city, a left-wing city, but do they not understand? Not only is this guy a communist, but he's an Islamist. So I think they're going to pay the price for their stupidity. And unfortunately, though, this is going to motivate more Islamists to run and more communists. The Red-Green Alliance is alive and well, and Mamdani is a poster child for it. The Red-Green Alliance is a reference to the Marxists and the Muslims in this country that are working together to take over this country. And they're doing it through the political system largely, although they do have their paid rioters, the Antifa types and whatnot. So, hey, it's hard to believe that the same place where our country was attacked on 9/11 has now elected not just a communist, but an Islamist. Tucker Carlson recently defended Mamdani and basically said, in terms of charges of him being anti-Semitic, that was not true. Now, first off, I don't know how Tucker knows that. I don't know how well he knows the guy. And I got it. Just because you are anti-Zionist doesn't necessarily mean you're anti-Semitic. I think a lot of times that is true. But the guy's an Islamist. If you know anything about the doctrine of Islam, they are opposed to Jews. They are opposed to Christians. And they are opposed, their whole doctrine is at odds with our Constitution. So I don't know why Tucker would make a comment like that defending him against charges of anti-Semitism. I think it's pretty obvious that he is anti-Semite as well as he's anti-American and he's anti-Constitution. He's a communist Islamist. So I don't understand why Tucker is defending this guy. I also don't understand why our governor, Bill Lee, after the loss of the victory of Mamdani in New York, he invites all the liberal carpetbaggers to come to Tennessee. Now, think about it just for a minute. Just because they don't like Mamdani and they're afraid of what New York will become, these are not the people that you want to invite to come to Tennessee. The last administration in New York was not exactly conservative. There hasn't been a remotely conservative mayor in New York since probably Giuliani. So these guys are pretty far left. Just because they're leaving now that Mamdani's in charge doesn't mean they're not very, very far left. And to make it worse, he said, we've got a economic council, economic development council that will help you out. Translation, he wants to give our tax dollars to New York businessmen to come here, relocate in Tennessee. That's just all kinds of stupid. I wish there was a way we could send him to New York. Trump invites an Islamic terrorist, Ahmad Shara of Syria, to the White House. Now, this guy was arrested. He was captured, not arrested, he was captured by our forces in Iraq several years ago, fighting for Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Now he's like the president of Syria. They put a suit on him. Trump had him in the White House today. He's bragging on him. Oh, he's a great guy. You know, we work well together, blah, blah, blah. This is insanity. You could put a suit on a terrorist. He's still a terrorist. I don't think this is going to end well. I'm really sad and sick to see it. You know, it's sad and sick to think about all the people that we went overseas to fight the Islamic terrorist. Now we put a suit on him and we invite him to the White House, and we're going to act like he's an honorable guy. That's just disgraceful. The Supreme Court refuses to hear the challenge to gay marriage. Kim Davis, a brave county clerk from Kentucky, 10 years ago, when the Supreme Court, in their opinion, the Obergefell opinion, said that gay marriage was the law of the land, she filed to have that reversed. Now, that was also tied up with some of the, she was actually sued by a gay couple that she refused to sign their certificate. Now, they still got married. Somebody else signed it, but she was sued. There's a huge judgment against her. And so her lawyer, they sued to have the whole thing overturned. The Supreme Court basically says they're not going to hear it, which means a lower court ruling stands. But a couple of things on this. This is just more of this whole idea of judicial supremacy. And the Supreme Court, matter of fact, the federal government has nothing to do with marriage. Now, since Obergefell, during the Biden administration, they did pass, I'm trying to remember the name of the law, Respect for Marriage Act, or really it was Disrespect for Marriage Act. So we do have a congressional law on the books in reference to this, but marriage was never the purview of the federal government. Never. And the court has intervened on this, and of course you had the court intervene. After that is when you got this law passed under the Biden administration. This is not the court's lane. It's absolutely not the court's lane. And this is one of those things where our states, and I know this has been 10 years, our state should nullify this. Tennessee has in their books a law, an amendment to the Constitution that says marriage is between one man and one woman. We should nullify this, okay? And don't tell me we can't do that. Number one, it's the state's responsibility to nullify unconstitutional federal actions. It doesn't matter if it's the president. It doesn't matter if it's the Congress. It doesn't matter if it's the Supreme Court. If it's not their lane, if it's unconstitutional, it's the responsibility of the state to nullify it, to say, no, we are not going to go along with this. And don't say, well, we couldn't possibly do that, because guess what? In 2022, there's the Bruin opinion on the Second Amendment, and basically says that states can't have more restrictions, any kind of restriction that wasn't comparable to something on the books in 1791. So if our state can nullify the Second Amendment here in Tennessee, I don't see why we couldn't nullify gay marriage. Now, there's a problem with all of that in terms of the First Amendment. Remember, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, were originally restrictions on the federal government. They were not restrictions on the state government, just the federal government. And they only became restrictions, and I know everybody's going to say, well, the 14th, no, that's total BS. You've been lied to. Go read the 14th Amendment. It doesn't mention any of the Bill of Rights. And the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868. In 1871, there was something called the Blaine Amendment that they attempted to pass. I think it passed the Senate but didn't pass the House, or vice versa. But basically what they wanted to do was extend First Amendment protections to the states, basically make the states have to comply with the words of the First Amendment, which would allow the federal government to beat them over the... Guess what? It didn't pass. So how did we come to have the federal government take what was supposed to be a restriction on just the federal government and make it make it a hammer for them to beat over the head of the states? Well, we did get that through incorporation. The court did it, but they didn't start it till about 1925. Incorporation of the Bill of Rights is a total court fabrication. Total court fabrication. The Second Amendment, they didn't add that. They didn't say that was incorporated until 2010. So you can't say that the 14th Amendment made the Bill of Rights applies to the state. You have to say that the court did it, but the court doesn't have the authority to do that. They created this doctrine of incorporation decades later, and we are stupid for allowing it. States should nullify this. States should nullify most of what the federal government does. We've got some TDOT tyranny in Kingston, Tennessee. Transportation Department of Tennessee. Now in Kingston, and unfortunately I don't have a link for you, but I'm going to tell you about this. Monty Fritz, who is, by the way, running for governor, and he's the best of the three candidates, hands down. In Kingston, where he is from, there's an area that is supposed to be cut by the state. It's state right-of-way. Well, they weren't maintaining it, so the city of Kingston started maintaining it. And somebody, the city of Kingston, decided it would be a good touch since it's a small community, predominantly Christian. Hey, we're going to cut, with the lawnmower, cut a cross into the lawn there. And it's not something you can see driving by. There's only certain places you can see it. Well, somebody saw it. Somebody called the state and complained. And I guess the state, called down and said, hey, you guys need to cut that cross out. And they're like, no, we're not going to. So now, supposedly, on Wednesday, the state is supposed to show up and cut out that cross. Think about that. That is ridiculous. They're going to cut out the cross. They're going to spend the time and effort. They weren't maintaining it. Kingston was maintaining it. And now, they're going to come down. The state is going to cut that cross out. What kind of garbage is that? Now, Monty has organized a little welcoming committee for them, and I'm sure this will all be peaceful. And this is going to be, and I'm sorry I don't have the link posted. I had a little slip up there, but I'm going to give you the information. This is for this Wednesday, November 12th, 8 a.m. It's at mile marker 352, exit 352. And they're going to meet, I guess there's a McDonald's right there that they'll meet at 8 o'clock. To organize a little hello protest for the state. But just think about how tyrannical that is. The state's not doing its responsibility. Somebody takes the job that they were supposed to be doing. They put a little cross in there, and now our state's upset, and now they're coming to cut out the cross. That is pathetic. It's really pathetic that it's happening in Tennessee. Tomorrow is Veterans Day. Remember your veterans. And I want to say something on this. I know me and our guest talked about this, I think, yesterday. You may have seen this. There was a British guy on a British morning talk show, and he was talking about all of the sacrifices made. Now, tomorrow is Veterans Day. It's not Memorial Day, but still, talking about all the sacrifices made, and now they have lost all those freedoms in their country, in England, that those guys fought for. Mm-hmm. Well, I think even though we've gotten something of a respite on that since Trump is in office, the people, the big government people, the communists in our country, that are some still in our federal government and in our state government, they're working to undermine all of the sacrifices made over the years. So we need to remember that. So think about our veterans, but think about our veterans. Think about when you vote, when you support somebody. Is that person upholding the sacrifices made by our veterans? And that wraps up this installment of the Informer Report. If you have a news story that you want to alert us to, be sure to send us an email at informer.tv@gmail.com. We'll be right back with our guest right after a word from our brand new sponsor, LifeWave. Discover the life technology created to fit and improve your wellness needs. Your wellness, your LifeWave.
Light, the energy of life itself. Since the beginning of time, light has sustained us, fueled our growth, and shaped the world. Even Einstein recognized that everything we are is made of light. But what if we could harness the light within us, not just to live, but to renew, restore, and rejuvenate? Introducing LifeWave X39, the first product in the world that activates stem cells using our body's own light. Backed by clinical research, multiple patents, and over 10 years of stem cell research, a revolutionary wearable light technology that unlocks the power of activating our own stem cells with a single, safe, affordable, non-transdermal patch that puts you back in control of how you look, feel, and perform. Unlike drugs or chemicals, X39 works naturally, awakening your body's ability to heal and thrive. It's time to unlock your full potential, restore your vitality, and embrace a healthier, more vibrant you.
Welcome back. Before we get to our guest today, I want to mention that today is the official birthday of the Marine Corps. In honor of that, we have a little music to play. And now to our guest, Dave Rentschler, a former Marine, by the way. Thank you for being with us. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, Dave. Thank you. And that's one of my favorite songs.
Imagine that. So do you go to the balls? Have you gone to the Marine Corps balls?
I have in the past, but
okay. You're not driving across country?
I'm not driving cross country. I had someone that asked me if I'd go to Philadelphia,
right,
because apparently the Marine Corps was founded at Tung's Tavern in Philadelphia in 1775, and he wanted me to go to a pub crawl up there, but I declined.
Okay. Yeah, that could be a little dangerous, huh?
We might have to fight our way out.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine that the Marine Corps started in a tavern. That's hard to believe. So other than being a former Marine?
Oh, a little bit about, I'm a businessman. I sell electrical equipment. I travel across the country dealing with not the country, across the state of Tennessee, dealing with manufacturers that are manufacturing products. And so I get to go to a lot of places, meet a lot of people. My wife is named Karen. We've been married for 40 years.
Wow.
I have 7 children and 18 grandchildren. And I lived 30 years ago, I lived in Memphis, and 30 years ago I moved to a little town in Middle Tennessee called Hohenwald, Tennessee, which is famous. If you ever want to look it up on the map, it's got an elephant sanctuary, and Meriwether Lewis from the Lewis and Clark expedition is buried in Hohenwald.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
So anyway, that's, I'm active in business. I've been a county commissioner, and now I serve as a constable for the last 16 years in Hohenwald.
Okay. So how did you get interested in the whole Battle of Athens deal?
Well, I think originally, I think about 15 or 20 years ago, I read an article in, maybe it was the New American. I don't know if you've heard of the New American magazine. Yeah. And then I just started looking into it. And then one of my family members actually moved to Athens, Tennessee, and about 3 years ago. And every year, Athens, Tennessee has a Battle of Athens festival.
Okay.
And they talk about the battle. They bring in relatives, which is a very interesting thing I'll talk about in a minute, about the battle itself, to talk about the battle. And then we go on a walking tour, because most of the buildings where this all took place in downtown Athens are still there.
Oh, cool.
So it's like living history. Next year will make the 80th anniversary.
Wow. Now there's a Marine connection to this story too, right?
There is a Marine connection to the story. The Marine connection is there was a 21-year-old Marine by the name of Bill White. He had actually been discharged from the Marine Corps prior to the end of World War II. But when this all took place, which we'll develop as we go on here this evening, he was really the voice when the people of Athens reached a point where they thought their election was going to be stolen again,
right,
which had been for many years, and he gave the direction and the voice. There are many unsung heroes. He's just one of them.
A 21-year-old.
21-year-old Marine, but he gave the voice and the inspiration, and that's his picture, I guess, we're looking at right there.
Yeah.
Bill White also, one of his relatives was the founder of Knoxville.
Oh, wow.
So it's just, interesting. And so I love history, so I just go down the rabbit hole and keep chasing things.
Okay. So what were the causes and everything? What led to this situation?
Well, what was happening, if I might just say one thing, just as because you were in the military as well, we each took an oath of office that said we would defend the country against enemies, both foreign and domestic.
Yep.
And so this story about the Battle of Athens is really about the domestic part of that story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you asked me what was going on at the time as far as what happened. Well, Athens, Tennessee, since about 1936. When I tell people the Battle of Athens took place in 1946, they usually say, "You mean 1846?" I said, "No, 1946."
Right.
In fact, it's commonly referred to as the only second American Revolution that actually was won. But in about 1936, there was a political machine that began to develop in McMinn County. McMinn County, Athens is located in McMinn County, and if you don't know where Athens, Tennessee is located, it's off Interstate 75, halfway between Knoxville and Chattanooga. So it's in a direct line.
Okay.
If you go on Interstate 75 from Chattanooga to Knoxville, you'll go right through Athens, Tennessee. But Interstate 75 was not there in 1946,
right.
of course. But so what happened, this political machine was developing. It actually started a little bit before 1936. What was happening is at that time, a lot of governments could work under what they call a fee system, where you charge a fee, and that's how they funded themselves. It didn't necessarily go into a general coffer for the whole county government. The Sheriff's Department collected a fee, the Register of Deeds collected a fee, and so McMinn County was doing that as well. But they were collecting.
Now that was legal. That part was legal. Okay.
In fact, when I served on the county commission in Lewis County, which is the county I live in, that is still a form of government, if I remember correctly, that a county can operate under if they would like. There are three models. There's a fee system and two others. I don't remember the name now, but they could still operate under that. But what was happening is the sheriff at that time was collecting fines or fees for everything. He was fining people for, appearing. Okay?
Right.
And so the political machine that started in 1936, it was a gentleman by the name of Paul Cantrell. Paul Cantrell, he was a member of a wealthy family in McMinn County. His parents or his father owned the Etowah utility company.
Okay.
And then he worked for the railroad. The railroad was very big in McMinn County at that time. And for a little bit of history about McMinn County that gives a little bit more light is McMinn was founded in 1819. The Trail of Tears goes right through McMinn County.
Okay.
And the Indians and the white people lived together quite well there. It wasn't until Andrew Jackson did the Trail of Tears that he separated those people and brought them out of that, forced them out of that county. But anyway, so Paul Cantrell, he decided to run for for sheriff in 1936 under the guise that he would clean up the fee grabbing of the sheriff's deputies. Well, that was a lie. All he did was increase that. And so he, at that time, the sheriff was a 2-year position. So he actually ran the sheriff, or he was sheriff from 1936 to 1940. And literally...
But you said two, so he
2
was
years,
reelected.
2 years a term.
Okay,
He was elected twice.
Okay.
And literally, they were collecting fees for everything. I mean, it was not uncommon. I think the general fee was $3.15 or something like that, which would be the equivalent of $300 today. And
that much?
yes, it was quite significant. In fact, in a 10-year period from 36 to 46, I think it was let's see here. I think they collected about $600,000 worth of fees in a 10-year period, which would be the equivalent of like $6 million today.
Wow.
Okay.
Did they have to show where all this money was being used?
Well, they were supposed to. But when you have the sheriff, that's part of the machine. You had a George Wood, who was the state representative and the Speaker of the Tennessee House and the election commissioner chairman, okay, and the purchasing agent for the county.
All those positions?
All those positions.
That doesn't even sound legal.
No, that doesn't sound, that's a picture of him right there. And then the judge, which this is one moment of a little bit of levity, I'll tell you. The judge was named Sue Hicks. He was the one who rubber stamped all the charges that...
a boy named Sue. Was that the original boy named Sue?
That's where it came from. Sue Hicks made his name in the Scopes trials in the 1930s.
Oh, okay.
And he was speaking at a judicial conference in Nashville in the 1930s, and there was an author in the audience who asked himself the question, what would it be like to go through life as a boy named Sue? And he penned a song. And Johnny Cash, of course, recorded that.
Right.
And it's alleged that years later, Johnny Cash called Judge Sue Hicks up and said, "How do you do, Sue?" So anyway, so these were the players. And so they were collecting, I mean, literally, when a bus would come into town or a train would come into town, the deputies would get on the train and say, "You look like you're drunk. Pay me $3.16 or I'm going to take you to jail." And so they collected tremendous amounts of money. In fact, they would beat up people indiscriminately. And so they not only were they collecting money, but they were instilling fear and terror in the people. And this went on for a period of 10 years.
How big was Athens at the time?
Athens was about 30,000 people.
Okay.
Okay? And about 10% of the population were GIs, about 3,000. So this was going on. Most of these GIs would have been in high school or even grammar school when Paul Cantrell first started in 1936. And so in 1940, he decided he was going to run for the state Senate. And he was going to take his chief deputy, was a guy named Pat Mansfield. And he was going to have him run for sheriff. Okay? And now, I would tell you this, Mr. Cantrell, when he was sheriff, he was making the equivalent of about $250,000 a year in 1946. The average deputy was making about $75,000 a year. So it was a big money racket. And like I said, they arrested people for anything. So anyway, in 1940, Paul Cantrell ran for Senate. Pat Mansfield ran for sheriff. And then George Wood, who was the state representative, he introduced a bill in the House called the Ripper Bill. And what the Ripper Bill did was there were approximately 22 voting precincts in McMinn County. And they reduced the number from 22 down to 12. Okay? And then they removed the county court, which at that time was made up of justice of the peace. They had 17 justice of the peace. Yeah. They reduced that from 17 down to 12. And in the bill, they specifically named 11 of the 12 replacements that were going to take their seat on the county court. So no election, it was just done in the bill.
How did that even pass? I mean, that's pretty blatant right there. I can't believe that even passed.
Yes, and there is some question.
Is this Louisiana history? This sounds like, I hear all these things about Louisiana or Illinois. This sounds that bad.
Well, when you hear about the Cantrell machine and how it started, it gives a little bit more understanding as to how this happened. So also at the same time, the other thing that was happening, when elections would occur, they were supposed to have strict absentee ballots, where before the election, a ballot a posting was supposed to be made at every polling place listing the names of those people who could not vote. County disregarded all that. McMinn County had a huge, I think they had, I read somewhere, they had more absentee ballots than the whole state of Tennessee combined at the time or something. It was quite large.
Right.
In fact, during this time, the Justice Department, Federal Justice Department, had received over 1,000 complaints from people in Athens, Tennessee. No other county in the United States had ever had that many complaints sent to the Federal Justice Department. But anyway, this was all done away with. In 1940, somehow, McMinn County, the people got mechanical voting machines that they were able to purchase because they thought they could stop some of the fraud.
Sound familiar?
Yes. And the machine, guess what? They got rid of them because they couldn't cheat. Because the way they would cheat at that time, you know, you'd have a box and drop your ballot in.
Right.
Well, they were using translucent ballots. So when a person went to the poll and they had to check their box,
right,
they could see who they were voting for.
Ah, okay.
And if they didn't like that, they would either refuse to allow them to vote, or they wouldn't. They had to have a, what do they call it, a poll.
Poll watcher.
No, when you were, you had to have a, in order to vote, you had to have a.
Oh, you had to pay a poll tax.
Poll tax.
Yeah. Okay.
They would deny their poll tax.
Oh, they wouldn't let them pay it.
They wouldn't let them pay it, or they would let people who weren't even eligible to vote come in. That was purely the choice of the deputy in the sheriff's department at that time.
Good
and
Lord.
So this is how they controlled it. There was one case I read about where Paul Cantrell, for the election, after the election took place and they went back to count the ballots, he took the ballots back to his business, had 20 Tennessee highway patrolmen surround his house, and would not allow any poll watchers or judges to go in there when they counted the votes. And part of this, which I'll get into, is the governor. This corrupt machine, McMinn County was just one area. There was a corrupt machine that went across the entire.
Who was the governor at the time?
The governor, I don't remember his name, but the gentleman that was the originator of the machine was a gentleman by the name of E.H. Crump. Okay, Mr. Crump, he lived in Holly Springs, Mississippi. He was the son of a Confederate cavalryman, and they're very poor, but he got into bookkeeping, and he ended up getting a job bookkeeping in Memphis, and then he eventually bought a saddlery company, and then married someone in prominence in the Shelby County area.
Yeah.
And from that, he decided he was going to run off to office. Now, part of this...
So he went from bookkeeping to book cooking?
Well, he went from bookkeeping to cooking. He became a councilman. And, you know, at that time, in that era, 1930s to 1946, FDR was in office. So it was very popular to be a Democrat, and all the programs, you know, everything that was going on. And so what Mr. Crump did, he ran for city council, and they put him on what they call the police board. The police board, you know, were supposed to be the supervisors of ensuring that the police were conducting themselves properly. Well, what Mr. Crump did was, there was a lot of graft in Memphis, a lot of brothels, a lot of saloons. The people of Memphis were very upset about what was going on. So Mr. Crump staged 3 raids and made himself look like a hero.
Right.
And, you know, he was cleaning up the crime. The people of Memphis loved that. Well, he took what he did with these false raids, and he ran for mayor of Memphis. And he won. And so part of the deal when Mr. Crump was the mayor, if you wanted to run a brothel, or you wanted to run a saloon or a gambling place, you had to pay to play. And those, I mean, this is not anything new, but those that wanted to be a part of his machine had to pay him, and the price was about 40% of the proceeds. So Mr. Crump made a tremendous amount of money by collecting these proceeds from the people in Memphis, or from these establishments of ill repute, you might say.
Right.
And so with that money, he was able to finance campaigns across the state of Tennessee, pay off judges. He was able to control everything. In fact, they said when Mr. Crump said, if he said, Dave, you're going to be the governor of the state of Tennessee, you would be the governor. Because not only would he have bought everyone off, but he hired so many people in Memphis and his political dealings, getting people off tickets and everything else, that he could deliver Memphis as a block.
Wow.
And so,
but he had the reach all the way out to McMinn County.
Yeah, McMinn County and Polk County, which is next county to McMinn, were probably his two most faithful counties. In fact, McMinn County is about 400 miles from Memphis. Dayton, Ohio is closer to McMinn County than Memphis is. But it was the southern rural counties that Mr. Crump was very strong in. And to tell you how much power he had is in Memphis, they had a law that was on the books that if someone thought you were derelict in your duty in your political office, that if they could get the DA to agree with that, you were gone.
No trial.
No trial. And so there was a DA in Memphis who Mr. Crump was derelict in his duty because he wasn't enforcing the saloon laws. He just kept everyone in check and he let his buddies run, who brought charges against him. And he had no defense because he was guilty. But Mr. Crump got the Tennessee Supreme Court to make this decision. And the decision was this: yes, Mr. Crump, you're guilty, so you're going to be removed from office. Well, he had 8 days left in office. Okay, so he stepped down from his office. But he had already won the election for the next mayor's office. And they said, but it doesn't apply to any office going forward or any election going forward. So it only applied to the end of his first term as mayor, but it didn't apply, according to the Supreme Court, to the second term. So he had this tremendous power. In fact, like I said, it went all the way across the country. The county I live in, Lewis County, we had a political boss by the name of Howard Wharf. He died in 1996. He was the last member of the Crump machine in the state of Tennessee.
Wow.
And he ruled pretty much the same way. So back to the Battle of Athens. But that's the scenario. That's what was going Paul
on.
Cantrell, Mr. Crump, they communicated. They were very much in touch with one another.
Okay.
And along with, and there were many other counties, but McMinn just happened to be a really bad one as far as that goes. So remember, the soldiers went to war as boys, and they came back as battle-hardened soldiers. And one thing, we talk about the bad things of our federal government, but one good thing that the federal government did while these soldiers were in the Army, in the Marines and Navy and whatever, is they were fighting a war against the Germans and the Japanese, right?
Right.
And they thought it was important that those soldiers knew why they were fighting the war. They were fighting for freedom.
Yeah.
Because in America, we could speak, we could vote for our leaders, and they couldn't do that in Germany. So they taught these soldiers, hey, this is why you're here, why you're fighting. Yeah. So these men come back. Obviously, Germany and Japan didn't have free elections, and guess what they realized when they came back to McMinn County?
They didn't either.
They didn't either. And so because the fee grabbing was so great, I mean, it was tremendous. And one of the things I'll say about Bill White, who I mentioned earlier, the young Marine, before he had gone off to war, he had experienced 2 events with the machine that really sort of set the stage for him. One, there was a gentleman by the name of Hap Johnson. He was 60 years old. He had 3 children. He was a widower. And to make extra money, he would walk in 3 miles into town every day to pick up papers so he could deliver papers in the community. Well, he was coming home one day with his children, and he had to relieve himself, so he stood behind a billboard. One of the deputies of the Cantrell machine saw him, literally beat him to death in front of his children, killed him. And Judge Hicks would not even bring it before the grand jury. And then there was another case that Bill White experienced where when he was about 11 years old, one of his classmates came into the class one day and was very sad, And the night before, the deputies were upset with his 22-year-old brother and broke into their house and shot his brother in front of his wife and his brother's wife, and no charge was ever brought. And then there was another abuse that took place with GIs. There was a gentleman by the name of Earl Ford. Earl Ford was in the Seabees. He'd come back home on leave after being out for 16 months, I think, away from home. And they went to this club called the Halfway Club to listen to music and get a couple drinks. And he asked to make a phone call. The proprietor of the establishment said, "We don't have a phone here," so he decided to leave. So he and his buddy left. Well, as they were going out, one of the deputies, a deputy named Minus Walford, Minus Walford was his name. He was probably one of the most evil of the deputies, and he had just hired 2 new deputies that were both prison releasees. Okay, and deputized them. And so they figured that GIs, they came home from the war, what did they have in their pocket? Money. Okay, it was an easy way to get money. So they met this Earl Ford out in the parking lot. They charged him with being drunk or something, and started beating him up with billy clubs. And one of these former prisoners or prison releasees, new deputies, pulled the gun on him, and he held his hands up, and he said, "If you move, I'll shoot you." He shot him anyway, and Earl Ford died 20 minutes later. And the epitaph in the Athens, Tennessee Post-Athenian, their newspaper, said, "Earl Ford, killed in the service of his country in Athens, Tennessee." So these were the type of things that were going on in Athens, Tennessee at that time. And so then there was one other shooting. Didn't kill the servicemen, but they shot the man just because his wife had said something to Paul Cantrell's wife. She was upset with how they were operating the county. And
I was just getting ready to ask if there had been any pushback by the citizens at this point.
Well, at this point, they were terrified.
Right.
People did not go out and vote. So what ended up happening, these GIs came back, they saw all this stuff that was going on, and they began talking amongst themselves. We're not going to live this way. Because now they knew they didn't have to live this way.
Yeah.
And so they started talking about forming a party where they were going to run for office. So they formed what they called the GI Party. It was nonpartisan, 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. But their promise was going to be this: every vote will be counted as cast. That's the only thing that they could promise the people, that every vote would be counted as cast. So they started meeting secretly. They met in the Robert E. Lee Hotel, which another interesting note is if you went to...
got a picture of
that? Oh, I got a picture, yes. That's the Jim Buttrin on the top, who is the campaign manager, and then the 5 below, Knox Henry and the other gentleman there ran for all the offices, sheriff, county clerk, register of deeds, and they were all World War II veterans.
Okay.
The gentleman on the right, I think his name is Charles Pickle. He was actually a World War I veteran. He looks
a little older than
he was like 51 or whatever.
Oh, wow.
Interesting story I'll tell you about him. We go along here as well. But they started meeting secretly, and the people of Athens or McMinn County were afraid, but they were hoping for change.
Right.
So these servicemen, I started to tell you about the Robert E. Lee Hotel. It was considered at the time between Knoxville and Nashville the most majestic hotel in that area at the time. And I think it's interesting that before they built that hotel in 1930, there was another building, and that's where Sherman had his headquarters on the way to Atlanta. Yeah. I thought it ironic that they named it the Robert E. Lee Hotel.
Yeah.
Still there today.
Good, good.
But anyway, they started campaign headquarters, and they started having open meetings. They started talking about who was going to run, and they selected the 5 members to run. And so the Cantrell machine didn't take...
There's a picture of that.
Oh, that's the headquarters right there. Yeah, that's the campaign headquarters right there. And then right down the street, there's another tire company called, that's the GI headquarters. and there's a company called S&K Tire Company. I'll tell you about that. That was owned by a gentleman by the name of Otto Kennedy, who was the chairman of the Republican Party in McMinn County, Tennessee. But so the GIs, what they were doing is they started organizing. The Cantrell machine didn't take too seriously what they were doing until about a week or two before the election. And then they began to realize that, hey, you know what? The people of McMinn County may not vote for us, and we need to control this election. So on Election Day, which was August 1st, 1946, which is a Thursday, and I will tell you, if anybody wants to go to the Battle of Athens festival, it's always the Saturday preceding August 1st.
Okay.
So you can just pretty much mark it. And there is a website that you could go to called the Battle of Athens TN.org.
Okay.
So on Election Day, I think, there it is, yeah, right there, Battle of Athens Tennessee.org. On Election Day, there were the multiple polling places, but there were 3 in the city of Athens because Athens is the biggest town.
Right.
There's 4 towns in McMinn County: Etowah, Nyota, Athens, and then Mount Harmony is the other town, I believe, in there. But there are 4 main towns. Anyway, that's the polling place that people are looking at right there. They had a line that went back 1.5 blocks around that. They'd never seen so many people out to vote because people thought, hey, we're finally going to have a chance. So, and they took, and one thing that happened that morning that was very interesting, every day a train from Tellico, Tennessee came in. It had about 3 or 4 passengers on it. But today, that on Election Day in 1946, they had about 30 people come in on a train. And all of them had guns and badges. That was the one common denominator. Normally, the Sheriff's Department in McMinn County had 16 permanent deputies and 20 to 30 reservists. But on Election Day, they brought in 250 armed men.
From where?
All over. Some were prison releasees. I think the governor of the state had actually released a man convicted of rape to come in and help to keep the peace.
God.
So,
and who was the governor at that time?
I have to go back and look. If you hadn't asked me the question, I'd tell you. But they brought in 250 men. They stationed them all at the polling places. The GIs had organized and had GIs at all the polling places to make sure things that were going.
So how many GIs are involved at this point?
Well, there's the 14 that were really the drivers, but there's probably 60 GIs. Okay. And Election Day at that time, at least I wasn't around in 1946, but what I understand, when you didn't have early voting.
Right. It was all one day.
One day.
Yeah. Imagine that.
It was right, concept. Which is what we need to go back to.
Yeah.
Was a big event. Everybody went downtown, businesses closed, and so people were just mulling around town. So there, things are going around as normal. One of the other polling places, the courthouse, one of the GIs had complained that they were letting non-poll tax people come in and vote. Right. And so the deputies arrested him and took him off to jail. And so this type, they say that the best communication in the world is not a radio, is not the internet, it's over the back fence, people to people.
Right.
And so this information was beginning to disseminate through, and the townspeople were getting very agitated about what was going on.
Right.
And so things trucked along until about 3 o'clock that afternoon. And that's when the real trouble started. What happened there at the Waterworks place, which is the place that was just shown there. And yes, if you'll keep that one up, I'll explain that's part of the story. That's the Waterworks right there. There was a black gentleman by the name of Tom Gillespie. He was 60 years old. He was from freed blacks. There was a place in Athens, or there is a place called Black Hill or something like that. His ancestors couldn't vote.
Right.
He was highly respected by people in the town. Everybody loved Tom Gillespie. He still rode a horse into town. And so he came to the polling place. And there was a deputy by the name of Deputy Wise, Windy Wise, who asked him who he was going to vote for. And in particular, he asked him who he's going to vote for sheriff. And he wasn't going to vote for Paul Cantrell because he was running again. Paul Cantrell was sheriff from 36 to 40. Then he became a state senator. But in 46, he decided he needed to run for sheriff again because he was going to run for governor, and he needed to tighten things up a little bit in his county. Yeah. So he was going to go back and run for sheriff. But anyway, this Tom Gillespie was asked who he was going to vote for, and he told this sheriff, this deputy, Windy Wise, he was going to vote for Knox Henry, the GI candidate. And he said, get out of this place. And I won't use the expletive, but if you think black, you'll figure out what that was. Right. When he didn't move, he took out a set of brass knuckles and he knocked him to the ground. And Mr. Gillespie, after he recovered, he stood up, he walked back into the polling place, and he leaned up against the wall and he folded his hands because he was going to vote. Right. And this Windy Wise pulled out his pistol and said, I thought I told you to get out of here, and he shot him.
Right in front of everybody.
Right in front of everybody. And he started bleeding. Now, ultimately, Mr. Gillespie didn't die, but he started bleeding. Well, when that happened, the word began to spread like wildfire. And there were two GI watchers, and this is the picture right here. There were two GIs that were in there that were poll watchers. They wouldn't let them out, the deputies, because they knew they would start to spread the word. And so they waited for the opportune moment. In the picture you're looking at right there, the two gentlemen jumped out through the front window. And if you look very closely, right at the door in the center, you'll see a guy that's standing right in the middle. That's Deputy Windy Wise with a pistol. And then if you look by the black car, the one on the left, between the one on the left and the next one, you'll see a man with raised hands. If you look very closely, and there's another guy, they raised their hands so that if he shot him, at least they could say they had done nothing aggressive, but they were able to escape into the crowd. When that happened, the word got out. And so immediately the sheriff, Pat Mansfield at that time, he shut the polls down, and they started gathering all the boxes. Now, in the rural areas where people were voting, what they had deputies out there too. What the GIs instructed the people to do was to stay at the polls until the votes were counted and circle the polls. The deputies wanted them to go home at the rural election places because they wanted to, discard the vote, but they wouldn't go. And the GIs were winning like by a margin of 2-1. But the big voting places were the ones in the city, the three in the city. So Pat Mansfield, the sheriff at that time, about 5 o'clock, he got all the deputies lined up, and he actually went back to the jail in McMinn County, and they took the ballot boxes, and it was there they were going to change the new ballot. There's the jail right there. They were going to exchange the ballot boxes and put the votes they wanted in. Well, that was about 5 o'clock. So the GIs didn't know what to do because they saw that the election was literally
going to be stolen.
Right in front of their face. And once the election was certified, which would have been on Monday, it was done. Yeah. And so Bill White, our Marine again, was down at the GI headquarters. And the soldiers ran down there, what should we do? And so Bill White said, well, we're not going to win this by votes. Go home and get your guns. And so the soldiers ran home, but they came back and they didn't have, he said it was a mixed bag of calibers and it wasn't really well supplied. But somebody in the crowd said, you know what, we know a place here in town where we can get it. And so there was a National Guard armory in town of Athens. That's the picture of it right there. And so one of the GIs said, we'll drive down there with a truck. So they went down there. The sergeant who was over, this is his little funny story for you. The sergeant who was over the armory there, when the GIs came up and they said, we want you to unlock the door, he said, I don't know where the keys are, but they're not in my pocket. So they got in, they took 60 rifles. Yep. They took 2 Tommy guns. And by that time, it was about 7 o'clock. And they were gathering, across from, because the deputies and the sheriff and Paul Cantrell were all in the jail now.
About 250.
They're about 60 now, because the other deputies were still at the front. About 60 were in the jail. And so about 7:30, it was just starting to get dark, and they had the guns. Now, there's one thing I will show you. That's in front of the jail. There's also a picture that shows where the GIs were located. They sit on a knoll of a hill right there. In that picture, the GIs were on the knoll of that hill right there. And that's about 50 yards diagonally from the jail. Okay? And so they went to the GI polling place, and they came up the back street, and they all lined up on the top of that bluff right there. And so they could shoot down at the jail. Well, about 7:30, they kept demanding that they supply. In fact, it'd be hard for me to show you in this picture, but if you look at the top left corner of that picture, which would be about the 10 or 11 o'clock position, that's right where the knoll is located. And then if you go to right about the center of that picture, you'll see a dark black roof right in the center. That's the jail. Okay, so they were firing from that knoll of the hill over that way. So what happened was they had the rifles. They grabbed all the bandoliers and ammunition that they could possibly get. And finally, the sheriff's deputy said, if you want the mounts, you're going to have to come and get them. And so Bill White, again, pulled back the bolt of his rifle, let it go, and they heard somebody scream from the jail, "Hey, that sounds like the bolt of a rifle." And the fighting commenced.
Wow.
And so they volleyed back and forth.
There's some.
Yeah, that's the only actual picture of the Battle of Athens where a soldier had a gun in his hand. That was right across the street. There was a house, and you notice the one gentleman covered his head because they didn't want to be known. But they volleyed back and forth all night. And now the thing that's interesting about this too is because the soldiers were on the knoll of the hill, the backside of the hill was a safe area.
Right.
And so moms and girlfriends and everything, they were bringing food and snacks, so they would retreat, go back and get something to eat, and then go back to the top of the hill. Well, this went on all night till about 2:30 in the morning. Early in the evening, one of the GIs went to Bill White and said, "I know where there's some farm dynamite that the county uses, to blow out tree stumps and things." Yeah. He said, "Get it."
Good.
So this went on to about 3 o'clock in the morning, and finally nothing happened. And so they took one stick of dynamite, they threw it. They said a loud bang, nothing happened. They did a second one, nothing happened.
You mean it didn't go off?
No, it went off, but no response. Okay. The third time, they took 5 sticks and they threw it at the front porch of that jail.
Right.
And I think it blew the front porch off. And they screamed out, "The next one's going in the jail." And they heard, "We surrender." And at that point, the jail door opened. All the deputies, now about half of the deputies of that 60 that were in there had escaped. They jumped out the back window and ran because these guys were mercenaries, And so they brought them out. That's what the front of the jail looked like. They turned over the people. The people were involved in this, in the soldiers. They turned over the cars. All the deputies' cars and everything. They brought them out. That one deputy, Wendy Wise, who shot that gentleman, they roughed him up a little bit in front of the jail. This is another deputy who, right when that picture was taken, somebody came behind him and slit his throat, and his in-law, who was with the GIs, actually saved him. He pulled him quickly so it didn't cut his jugular vein. But they were on different sides, even though they were relatives here. Yeah. But that's Wendy Wise, after they beat him up a little bit.
Yeah, looks like he got what he deserved, or part of it anyway.
Bill Wise and the deputies took all Bill Wise and the GIs, took the deputies and they marched them down to the courthouse and made them walk in front of the people to see
Yeah.
You know, so the people could see who had done all these things to them, and then they took them to the jail, and they locked them in the jail. Now, what happened here, there's a picture of the deputies in the jail at that time. What happened at this point, first of all, and I think this is a pretty honorable thing, there's one of the GIs who was part of the GI party, his name was Ralph Dugan. Ralph Dugan. He realized that people were getting pretty anxious because, you know, they had just conquered this, and he said, he stood up on top of a car and he said, gentlemen, he said, we have taken and got what we wanted without anyone being killed. So no one was killed. And he said, let's treat these people with more respect than they treat us. And that seemed to calm the crowd down. So they took them to jail, and then that next day, what happened? Believe it or not, the GIs took every rifle, they went back to the armory, they cleaned them, locked them up, and locked the armory. So everything was kept in place. And the GIs, when they finally certified the election, the GIs won by a margin of 2 to 3 to 1.
Right.
What happened though? The election was certified on a Monday.
Right.
The Battle of Athens took place on a Thursday into the second Friday morning.
Right.
So they had the Cantrell, who was the senator at the time, he resigned immediately. Pat Mansfield, who was the sheriff, he left town that night and never came back. Okay. George Woods, who was the state representative from his hotel in Chattanooga, called and said, all the GI candidates have won, okay? But they had to still wait 3 days.
Right.
So the GIs and the people of the town met at the courthouse, and they voted an interim, like mayor,
right.
3 positions, and then the GIs, along with the citizens, and they said there were over 1,000 citizens that helped. They set up patrols in the town to ensure there was safety,
right.
And that nothing happened. Along the course here, the governor called Jim Buttram, who was the campaign manager for the GIs, and asked if they needed any help. And Jim Buttram told the governor, he said, we've been asking for help for months. We've got it taken care of. Stay out of our county. We'll take care of it peacefully. And so anyway, they secured the election. They took their rifles back to the thing, and life was back to normal after that. And what happened because of this, because there were many other counties that were being run by political bosses under the Crump machine, via the Roosevelt machine, you know, it sort of came down, that when the Battle of McMinn County or Battle of Athens took place, it broke the political machine because everybody resigned within 2 weeks, okay? In fact, all the new electees had to be reinstalled before the actual day they were supposed to be installed. But it began to break the machine all the way back to Memphis, and that began to become the demise of
Was there anybody in that chain that got any time out of this?
Wendy Wise, for shooting Tom Gillespie at the election poll, there got 1 year.
That's it?
Yes. That's a picture right there looking at, that is right across the street. The jail is no longer there.
Okay.
But that's a building where they painted a mural of the Battle of Athens. And what makes the Battle of Athens so interesting, I think, and what intrigues me about it is all the buildings, with the exception of the jail, are still there. In fact, there's a building right down from this building you're looking at with the mural here on a street called Hornsby, where there were lights on at night, and the GIs were afraid that they could be seen by the deputies, so they shot the building. They shot out the lights, and the pockmarks of the bullets are still in the brickwork.
Oh, wow.
So you can see everything. The armory's still there. That's the street right there where the building, you can't see the lights, but the lights were up on the top corner of that building where they shot them out, and that goes right along the side of the jail. So all these things you can see, you can do a walking tour. But the GIs secured the freedom for the people. And I'd like to, if I could read one thing, and then I know that you might have a question, but this is, I thought this was very interesting here. There was a famous World War II reporter by the name of Bill Downs. He was the first person to ever broadcast a live broadcast from Normandy Beach. He traveled through all France and Germany. And he also worked for the CBS correspondent Edward Morrow, if you've ever heard his name.
Yeah.
He covered Japan and Hiroshima and everything else. And he said this, he was down at the jail when this was all taking place. And he said, Downs stood in a wrecked jail interviewing the veterans, fresh from combat all over the world, who controlled Athens, Tennessee after a bloody battle. The young man had the stamp of combat in their eyes, said Downs, of fatigue, familiar with the hard days of Normandy breakdown and the Battle of the Bulge. They realized they had taken a serious step, said Downs, but do not interpret their action as taking the law into their own hands. Rather, they say they just put the law back into the hands of the people.
Absolutely. And that would be the, I guess, constitutional justification for the battle.
Yes. What I think the Battle of Athens teaches us here is that we have been given a Second Amendment. Now, I'm sure you don't think I'm advocating we go to war, but this has been given us as a remedy of last resort. And these soldiers and citizens in Athens, Tennessee had tried everything peacefully to resolve this.
Well, the Second Amendment, I mean, think about it. And, you know, I talked earlier about nullification, and that gets poo-pooed a lot. Well, oh, you can't do that. That's secession. No. First off, I don't understand people that believe in the Second Amendment like I do, and we understand what it's for. It's for in those cases when you have a tyrannical government. Now, I think they were thinking more at the time of a tyrannical federal government, which we got plenty of that too, but it does not make sense to me that in our Constitution we have a Second Amendment, which is to use force against a tyrannical government.
It's not for hunting.
Right, it's not for hunting, okay? Against a tyrannical government, yet we can't tell them no.
Why
that
not?
Makes no sense. How do we go from, I mean, the 10th and the 2nd go together.
Right.
It's going to be 10 or it's going to be 2.
Right.
And you can follow that up with your favorite adjective.
That's right.
Okay, but that, I mean, that's the way it was set up.
Right.
I mean, to think that you can't tell the federal government or your state if you have to, no, it just doesn't make sense. That's why we have a second, in the state of Tennessee, we have Section 26 of our Declaration of Rights for the exact same purpose, when the government becomes tyrannical.
But we've been educated to not think that, just like we've been educated to think that the courts make law.
Yeah.
They render opinions.
And here's what gets me too. So many people, a lot of conservatives, well, we don't like legislating from the bench. We don't believe in a living constitution. I got news for you. If you think the Supreme Court is supposed to be the final arbiter of all constitutional questions, you believe in a living constitution.
Oh, yes, you do.
You believe in legislating from the bench. That's the bottom line. And we have allowed the court to destroy our country. Congress has abrogated its responsibility. So many things they allow presidents, I don't mean just this president, but all presidents to do that is not legit. And so many other things they allow the court to do that's not legit. Because then they get to avoid a lot of the controversial decisions and say, well, it's the court. That was never the intent. Never the intent.
If you read Federalist Paper number 78,
yep,
it clearly states that the court has neither force
nor
will, which is money or
a sword. They don't control the sword. They don't control the purse.
Right.
And oh, by the way, let's remember what Congress can do. How much they can totally limit their appellate jurisdiction.
Right.
They could do away with every federal court if they want, because the only court we have to have according to the Constitution is the Supreme Court, and they only constitutionally have to have original jurisdiction. If the Congress said, you know what, federal courts, Supreme Court, you have screwed things up so much, we are stripping you of appellate jurisdiction, it would be constitutional.
It would be constitutional.
And I think that's what they should do, because I have zero use for our court. I think it's disgraceful, and it has been for most of our history.
Well, I think the way we get used a lot of times, too, is if they make a decision we like, then it's okay.
Yes.
But then when they make it, then we complain about it. We can't have our cake and eat it too.
That's right. And here's the thing: you might like an opinion, okay, but if you want to, when you like that opinion, if you want to tout the Supreme Court final arbiter, well, then when that court changes that opinion, 20 years, 50 years, whatever, well, then no. We've got to put the court back where they belong, in the little box that they belong in. That's what we have to do.
And I think the same is true for the executive order.
Oh,
by
absolutely.
the president.
Yeah.
I mean, my understanding, the executive order was basically just to say, hey, we're having lunch on the White House lawn. Please, all personnel be there.
Well, I mean, I believe that the executive orders are for the executive branch. But it's not for the other. He can't tell the other branches what to do. You have separation of powers. And he's not his own legislator. When I say he, I mean the president. I don't mean specifically Trump. Any president.
Right.
You know, we've got rules, and we always hear about the Constitution. We talk about the Constitution, but we've not followed. It's not been followed in our lifetime. It's not been followed in our parents' lifetime, and probably most of our grandparents' lifetime.
Well, probably what was it, the decision, Mayberry versus Madison? That created this whole concept of judicial supremacy, which is totally unconstitutional.
Well, it did and it didn't, because in that same opinion, and this doesn't get any play by the lawyer class, in that same opinion, he says that not all, and this is a paraphrase, not all federal laws are supreme. Only those that are made in pursuance of the Constitution. I mean, no law, if it's not in line with the Constitution, is supreme. And just because he said that it's our province to interpret the law, that doesn't mean that the executive branch doesn't have a responsibility to, well, wait a minute, this judge is obviously way off here. This court is obviously way off.
Right.
That's not, I didn't swear an oath to the judge.
Right.
I mean, if you think about it, if you had analyzed what we're being told and what we've been told our whole life, you can throw most of this out.
Absolutely.
You can just throw it out, and basically you're going to follow the part where it says all federal laws, or excuse me, all laws, and they even bastardize that. All federal laws are supreme, and the Supreme Court's the final arbiter. That is what they have told us and sold us. You can just throw the rest of this out if that's what you accept.
Absolutely.
But that's what we've accepted.
That's what we've
That
accepted.
is what we've accepted. We would not have all this garbage of gay marriage. We would not have people trying to shut down your state. And this is the way it worked originally. Like I said, the amendments were restrictions on the federal government, not the state government. And I'm not advocating a state religion. But states had it up until the 1830s. There were at least 2 states that still had state religions, which tells me that what they meant by the federal government should have nothing to do to prohibit or promote a religion, that meant the federal government. That's it. That's all it meant, was the federal government.
Well, I'll tell you a really interesting question I ask people from time to time, and generally they'll answer right even though they don't know why. And the question I ask them is this. Tell me who created who. Did the federal government create the states, or did the state governments create the federal government? And most people, I would say 90% plus, would say, oh, well, the states created the federal government. I said, then why are we subservient?
Right. Absolutely. That's a good question.
You know?
And as a matter of fact, if you look in Article 7 at the back of the Constitution, it talks about the states. It talks about that, you know, we needed 9 states to ratify this. It was the states that created it.
Right.
You'll look on here, there's not one federal official that signed the Constitution. There's not one federal official signature on here. They're all from the state.
The central government is the creation of the creators.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and can I make one more quick comment on this, just in closing?
Absolutely.
I would like to encourage anybody that if you haven't, if you would like to know more about the Battle of Athens, that there's a book by Chris DeRose called The Fighting Bunch, and you can find it on, you know, any number of bookstores. But one of the most intriguing things, I guess you want to say, what intrigued me about the whole Battle of Athens, is that the attorney, after they had won the election and they had got the voice back of the people, he said, they're going to come after you, meaning the federal government. They're going to try and prosecute. So J. Edgar Hoover sent men down to Athens to investigate who opened the armory, and nobody knew. Okay? They asked them, do you have an account of the ammunition? They said, we never keep account of the ammunition. So why would we do it now? And so that FBI agent said, There's not enough evidence here to prosecute, and even if there was, nobody would talk about it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but what I find very interesting is that in order to protect themselves, the men, the GIs, they did not talk about this event for almost 50 years.
Really?
They did not talk until like these men were in their 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And so in the book I have some autographs from some of the children or grandchildren that their father or grandfather was involved in it. They only found out about 15 or 20 years ago that their father or grandfather was even involved in this because they were silent about it.
So were the sheriffs, were the bad guys, did a lot of them leave, or were most of them, they stayed there?
A fair amount. Well, the ones that were for hire, they were gone.
Right, gotcha.
Okay. Paul Cantrell, believe it or not, he stayed, and this speaks to the testimony of men of character. Not Paul Cantrell,
Right.
but after so many years, the wounds were healed, and all the GIs wanted, they didn't want vengeance against these men. They just wanted a voice.
Right.
And those things were healed, and some of these same people would go fish and hunt together, and they were just men who, you know, Cantrell and others were just men who became hungry for power.
Right.
And it had to be broken.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways we're in the same place today.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know that if our state is as corrupt, but wouldn't shock me.
I wonder if we have the character of citizen, you know, that would take a stand, because people today are so involved with many things. I just wonder if freedom would take priority to anything else in their lives. I mean, our founding fathers...
Because we have a drive-through mentality, number one, and we have well, you just look at elections, assuming even if they're done correctly, people think their whole responsibility is to elect somebody,
Right.
and that's it.
Right.
They elect and then they disengage. And unless that person makes the front page for some scandal, they don't really know what that guy does, even though it's not hard to find out in this day and age. It's
Right.
real easy. It was, 30, 40 years ago, it was hard to really know, because
Right.
you only had maybe C-SPAN if you were a C-SPAN junkie, and you had whatever the paper put out. So
Right.
it was hard to know how your reps were. It's not hard to know now how your reps, whether you're talking at state or federal, how they actually vote. That's
Right.
not hard to know now, but most people just, I've done my duty. I elected him, and man, he didn't follow through, or she didn't follow through. And there's not enough involvement, especially at the state level, because everybody is so focused at the federal level. Well, guess what? While you're so focused at the federal level, they just have even more power. You have to force your state to take control back of what belongs in the state's lane, which is most things legitimately are state issues, not federal issues.
Well, one of the things I would say that we could also learn from the Battle of Athens is that if you really want change in your communities, you can't leave it to the federal government. Like right now, where we have the federal government going into the cities to take care of crime.
Yep.
No, the people that live in those places,
Yep.
they need to get upset enough with things to say, we're taking our city back.
Yeah. And the state, that should have been a state. If
It should have been a state
if troops
issue.
were going to be sent, and not just this governor. He's not the first governor that failed Memphis. Okay, he's one in a long series of governors and legislators that failed Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't have anybody there now if Trump did kick this off, but that's not his lane to go clean up crime.
I would have rather that he gone to the local sheriff and said, Sheriff, deputize as many men as you need, and tell me what resources you might
Absolutely. Would have been better. Would have absolutely
much
been
better.
So, hey, thank you very much. Definitely
much.
have you back. Hey, thank you all for being with us. And unfortunately, our guest for the second show tonight, Dave Benner, will not be able to be with us, but we will schedule him for a later date. It'll be in January sometime, and we'll get that date to you. I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell, so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Thanks again to Jonathan and Mary for their great financial support. You guys have made a huge, huge difference, and we really appreciate that. Check out our audio podcasts on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, tuniformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Our guest next Monday will be Tiffany Boyd, here to discuss ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. It may not be the good conservative organization many claim it to be. Join us next week and find out why. Hope that you can join us next week. Now, one other thing before I go. There was in Obion County Friday night, there was a GOP meeting, the Reagan Day event, and they had the 3 gubernatorial candidates there, well, sort of. Glenn Jacobs spoke for Marsha Blackburn, John Rose was there, and Monty Fritz was there. Now, we recorded this. We're not able to stream it live, but we recorded it. It's on our website. It's our YouTube channel as well. And go and listen to the 3 speakers. There's several other people that speak on there. Richard Archie's on there, as always. He gives a great speech. But listen to the candidates. And obviously, like I say, Marsha was not there. Jacobs filled in for her. But just listen to the contrast. Listen to what Monty has to say. And it just, he is head and shoulders above the other 2 on this. And this is, I think it's a good example. So I encourage you to go listen to that. And the book again, about the Battle of Athens, The Fighting Bunch by Christy Rose. And you can get it on Amazon or anywhere else you can get good books. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.